Suitu Fidei Edupsecem Pauperum, which really means defense of the faith and taking care of the poor and the sick. And that is really what the fundamental, core of our order. In fact, our order seeks to glorify God by promoting the sanctification of each member through his or her own work with the poor and the sick and witness of the Catholic faith. That is actually part of our rules and commentary. So the Houston region is one of 32 regions that the Federal Association has. We have 3 very active associations in the United States. And the Houston Area Auxiliary, which is led by Rhea, Taylor, and Jess, was really started to answer some pertinent questions relating to medicine and Catholic faith, and connect to maybe some current or potential members, right, through meaningful this discussion in forums such as these. So that's really all I wanted to say. I'll be obviously available later for questions if you have any. But I really wanted to thank again Rhea, Angela, Jess, and Taylor for all they do, and Kathy Hutzi, who's our regional hospitaler, the head of our region. She's not here, but she might be joining later, and I also wanted to thank her. So that's it. Thank you, Rhea, and let's get this webinar started.
Thank you so much. So tonight, I will be your moderator and kind of your host as well. My name is Rhea Salta. I'm a 4th-year pharmacy student at the University of Houston College of Pharmacy. Like 6 more weeks from now, I won't have to say that long title, and I can just tell you I'm a pharmacist, so we're almost there. And throughout this journey, I've kind of learned that bringing together Catholic faith and medicine has been difficult, can almost sometimes feel like you are a contradiction within the field. So this is where this webinar series was inspired, and Angela has really been through this process, and so I'm very excited to introduce her as our speaker tonight. A quick overview of our itinerary. We will have Angela as our speaker, followed by Q&A. During this time, you can ask questions, ask resources, situations, anything about her life or what she's also presented tonight. And then we'll just have some closing remarks and everyone will be free for the evening. So before we get started, just a few Zoom reminders. You do have the microphone icon at the bottom. Please make sure that you are muted throughout the presentation. Sometimes we can accidentally hit buttons and then hear dinner conversations. So let's make sure we're always muted. During the Q&A session, I ask that you please drop your questions into the chat box. As your moderator, I will be responsible for fielding those questions to Angela. But if there is a great discussion going, then we can always assess having like open conversation as well. So to get started, I'm going to read a little bit about Angela to you. So Angela is a 4th-year pharmacy student from the University of Kansas School of Pharmacy. She is currently located in Kansas City and will soon be moving to Chapel Hill to start her PGY1 residency training at the University of North Carolina. She is pursuing a career as an academic and ambulatory care pharmacist and has had an interest in bioethics since starting her undergraduate coursework. This interest has grown into a passion where she decided to enroll in the National Catholic Bioethics Center bioethics certification in 2021. She loves the field of pharmacy and her Catholic faith and is excited to understand the complexities of moral and ethical issues surrounding healthcare. Through her studies, she hopes to live out her faith and care for patients as best as possible through her work as a pharmacist. So Angela, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please feel free to share your screen now and the floor is yours.
Okay, let me go ahead and share my presentation with you all. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm so grateful to be able to talk to you all tonight and kind of share my story and share some really good resources that I found along the way. As Rhea mentioned, I am calling from Kansas, and I met Rhea and got involved with this order and learning about it because we were actually involved in a similar group in pharmacy. And so I do attend the University of Kansas School of Pharmacy here in Kansas, but yeah, I've loved getting to explore my Catholic faith and medical ethics during pharmacy school. And as she said, it really grew from an interest into a passion and something I'm continually pursuing. And so this presentation, this first part of this webinar is really just how I got started and what my path was. So I'm really excited to share that with you all tonight. And because I am interested in academia, I cannot let a presentation go on without some objectives. And I know that that's something probably not that you guys have to, there's not going to be a test at the end of this, but what I'm hoping you all get out of this is to be able just to recall some aspects of my story and be able to retrieve some of the references and use them for your own your own study and your own answers to your own medical questions that you might be encountering within your work or within others that you know involved in this work. Just try to understand some of the significant questions that I will be discussing and bringing up and start to formulate your own answers. And then, yeah, just have a great discussion about some of the current and or future issues that we have here in our healthcare system and as Catholics. So to start, how I got started, I went to undergraduate school in K-State or Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas. And I grew up on a farm. So my first job was in a pharmacy, a first real job. And I remember going in very nervous, not understanding a lot about pharmacy or even about how my faith would involve that. I just wanted to start working and get myself acquainted with the field. And at the time, I was dispensing the drug called Plan B, and I wasn't aware of what it was, and I wasn't aware if there were any issues about it. But I have brothers who are physicians and involved in the healthcare field. And as I was explaining my new job, one of my brothers pointed out to me that I should stop selling that. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, that shouldn't even be a drug that you use. And his explanation was, I think, well intended, but it didn't give me the answers I needed. And if I was going to tell my boss I needed to stop selling this, I wanted a good enough reason. So I did a couple online researches, maybe looking into Catholic Answers website, I think, if I remember. But I did decide to ask my boss if I could stop selling it because I wanted to be on the safe side. I didn't want to do anything that was unethical. And I really did want to respect what the Catholic Church taught about it, and even if I didn't fully understand it. And the day that I finally encountered, after I told my boss I don't want to sell this, the day that I finally encountered a patient where I had to hand that off to someone else, another pharmacist I was working with, after the patient had left, came right up to me and said, you know that that's not an abortive patient, right? She went right up to my face. And I didn't have a reason to give her. I didn't have an answer. I just kind of told her that it was my choice and I wanted to be on the safe side. But that encounter really shook me because I thought, she really feels strongly about this and she's gone to pharmacy school. Am I wrong? And why don't I have a good enough answer? And how am I going to explain this to her? She wasn't Catholic. And again, we didn't really talk at length about it, but it really shook me. So at the time I was going to the Student Catholic Center in Manhattan, Kansas, and approached a priest who was actually conducting a medical ethics kind of, not webinar, but a series going over different issues. And so I emailed him and he gave me a great chapter book or a chapter from a book about the Catholic pharmacist. And I enjoyed reading it, although it was kind of complex. And basically gave me an explanation that made somewhat sense about pharmacist roles and these kind of drugs. So that helped me kind of get started, but I knew that I really needed to dig a little deeper. And something else that kind of drove that was my own personal health issues. And I'm not going to go over health history, but I do have something called PCOS. And the first line recommended treatment is birth control. And me, being a single woman and believing in, following my Catholic faith, it wasn't an issue. But I kept asking myself, what if I was married? And what if I had this recommended to me? Like, what would I do? So it really hit home on a personal level when I was encountering these kind of therapies and these ethical questions. And I mentioned there, I'm seeking other Catholic healthcare professionals. I actually have a sister-in-law who's a pharmacist who works in the retail setting. But the same thing kept coming up. I didn't get these answers that really made sense and made me feel really appreciative of the Catholic truths that were being professed by those I knew, and I didn't really understand how I could explain it to others. And then what really hit the nail on the head was going into pharmacy school and encountering a lot of difficult lectures. I thought I had encountered a lot of questions before pharmacy school, but man, pharmacy school, they just came up left and right. I feel like I had 2 new questions every week after I was learning a new disease state. And so I really became convicted that this was something that I was going to have to address sooner rather than later, because I hated sitting with these questions, not understanding them, really wanting to again, show truth to others, show truth to myself within the Catholic faith, and not knowing how I was going to do that. So at the time, I was in Lawrence, Kansas, and there was a student center there, Catholic student center called the St. Lawrence Center. And they had a group called the St. Gianna group. It was a medical ethics group. It was right up my alley because finally there was a group that met frequently who were students interested in their Catholic faith and how to integrate that into their medical profession. We met kind of infrequently, I would say about once a month, and we would go over maybe an article or a video describing some ethical issue or topic. And it was really to build community, but I absolutely loved it. And I was glad that I had that group to kind of lean on as I was doing all of this work. But again, it was infrequent and it was kind of surface level. And I'm just a person, I love to know the deep answers to a lot of things. So I started doing my own deep diving, again, after I hit those pharmacy lectures, trying to understand what principles could guide me in all of these different scenarios. What are some grounding ideas or grounding beliefs that I could turn to, so I at least had something that to kind of hold on to, because again, things just felt very shifting and they felt very surface level. The first document, which I'll mention here when I talk about resources, was called the Ethical and Religious Directives, put out by USCCB, or the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And that was really the first groundwork document that I read. Had to read it several times for it to make sense to me, but I read that a lot and tried to understand it. And then I went on to other Vatican documents, again, like Catholic articles, and maybe tried to find some medical articles, but really tried to do a deep dive and understand the answers to my questions. But then it kind of came up to the time when I wanted to really know my specific pharmacy questions. Because while they might talk about the issues surrounding maybe euthanasia, I wondered what a pharmacist in that situation should or should not do versus like a doctor. Because while I would love to know that answer, what am I going to need to do in my field? So I really had to reach out to specific ethicists or priests who were knowledgeable in this area. Particularly, I did reach out to NCBC, which is the National Catholic Bioethics Center, because they have some great ethicists there who I had discussions on the phone with about my specific questions. And one thing I didn't list up here, but I wanted to mention, aside from all of the medical questions that I had, I realized I really hadn't taken a deep dive into my faith as an adult. And I really had to do that work in terms of just getting to know my Catholic faith, getting to know God, strengthening my relationship with him. So I just decided to read the Bible and the Catechism. There's a one-year reading plan, and I just decided to do that deep dive in my faith alone. And that I know will pay off dividends in my life, but it also strengthened my search here in the medical questions I was searching. So after I've done all this different piecing together questions and resources, I felt that I had exhausted a lot of different things, at least in my field, and questions I had, but I wanted to know that what I had learned and the conclusions I had come to were certain or were true. No one was really checking me. Again, I didn't have people in my life who were really well versed in these questions and these answers. So I was like, who is and who can check me? And that's when I was looking on the NCBC website. I saw that they had a certification. I knew they were experts. I knew they had great work and great resources. And I thought, when's a good time for me to take this step to confirm what I know? I'm a very busy student. I'm going into residency, but I'm so passionate about this. I love learning about this. When should I do it? And as I was reaching out to the NCBC to try to get information on the certification, one of the secretaries there said, this is really the time when you're learning about what you're going to be doing. You should be right alongside learning about what your faith teaches, so that way you can apply it immediately and then really take off from a really good foundation. And so COVID also hit, which made me also question whether I should do this now, but I decided to do it now. And I'm so glad that I did, even though it is an added workload and added stress. It's honestly a source of enjoyment. And I just love getting that break away from my coursework into diving into my faith. And it's brought me very close to God. So I'm very appreciative for that. So here are what I would tell someone who's interested in looking into medical ethics from the Catholic perspective, some initial resources I would tell people to go to. So I mentioned the ERDs, or the Ethical and Religious Directives. They really are the standards for how to practice as a Catholic healthcare professional. Again, I read this several times because I just wasn't used to reading medical, kind of jargon mixed with ethical considerations. It was just a mind shift. So I had to make, but it's definitely worth it. this document is gone over in our certification, and it's broken into 6 parts. And they kind of break it into different considerations, beginning of life, end of life, things like that. And they start with an introduction of just kind of why we believe what we believe, bringing in the gospel truths, bringing in the Catholic teaching, and then they give very specific directions to Catholic professionals on what we do believe and what we do not believe in. So it's very good at kind of educating and then instructing specifically. So it's a great place to start. And these slides will be released. These resources are hyperlinked, so when you click them, it'll take you directly to the source. One of the documents I love the most is Humana Vitae. This is, I think it stands for Of Human Life. I hope I'm right on that. But it is an encyclical that has been life-changing for many, and it certainly was for me. And I was very intimidated to read this document for some reason. I kept putting it off, and I decided to go to church and spend time just with it. And I read it in about an hour, and it was so inspiring. It was beautiful. So I would absolutely recommend anyone to read this document. It's fairly short. It's definitely shorter than the ERDs, but it speaks about marriage, about married love, and about the responsibility of parents, with that life-giving ability. And it's beautiful. And then the third resource is a book called Life Issues, Medical Choices. This was covered in the St. Gianna group I mentioned during my 3rd year of pharmacy school. And it's a very easy read. They go over issues in a kind of question and answer format. And it's written by several ethicists, group of ethicists. And I love the fact that we could have discussions with it. And it was, I think, really built for kind of like a study group. Fairly quick read, goes through a lot of different topics. And yeah, I would recommend it to many people. Father Tad is actually the director of education, I believe. I hope I'm not wrong, at the NCBC, and he has his own website and specific articles that are usually no more than like 2 pages on things like Plan B and things like contraception. And it's very pointed arguments and discussion, and I love those as resources. They also have something kind of new at the NCBC called Ask a Question, but basically you get to ask your specific question and consult an ethicist. Again, I went to just kind of the general, emailed them and say, hey, can I talk to someone? But now I realize that this would be a great place to shuffle my questions specifically in that avenue. So those would be the initial ones. I would say those are more to get you started. And then if you kind of want to keep on going with hearing new issues or hearing new topics, I absolutely recommend NCBC's Bioethics on Air podcast. It's on Apple Podcast, but this has been particularly helpful with COVID because they have covered so many COVID related issues, again, in a very accessible way, and something I can even listen to when I'm driving, but vaccine ethical considerations, so many different things I would never even think of in terms of the kind of COVID changes to medicine, who we let into the hospitals, how those different ventilator, shortage of ventilators, how those are distributed, just really great, quick answers to a couple of those current issues. And secondly is the, you can tell I like NCBC. This is another NCBC resource. It's a comprehensive practitioner book. This was probably the most thorough study that I did in terms of bioethics, because it's a huge book and I got a lot of comments from my family, but I wanted that comprehensive picture. I thought, what all am I going to have to deal with in terms of trying to figure out answers? And I love this book. This would be probably the last stop if I would tell someone, but I loved it. And again, it's not specific to pharmacy, but it's more just for the general healthcare practitioner. And I've even been able to reference it during my certification for specific topics, and it's amazing. So lastly, these are kind of the organizations that I go to in terms of just, any kind of resource. So USCCB does publish the ERDs. They did publish a document relating to COVID vaccines, which maybe some of you heard during Sunday Mass. It's where I heard that this document was released. So they kind of give, updated recommendations and guidance on their website. Of course, NCBC for a lot of different things I've already discussed. CMA stands for Catholic Medical Association. And I used to think that this was more for physicians and not something that really, that I could gain a lot from, but There's actually a group in Wichita, Kansas, which I'm from, called the St. Gianna Guild. And a woman who runs that group, I talked to her and she said that they have kind of national yearly meetings. She says they're very inspiring to see all these people coming together and having a bunch of different talks. And she says she loves going to them. And I actually, after hearing her talk about it, I thought I need to go to one of those. So not just for physicians, I think that anyone can join, and it's probably a really good community there. And lastly, CHA stands for Catholic Healthcare Association. I just kind of put this for completeness sake. Again, I'm not going into the hospital setting, but this I would think more pertains to people who are administrators who own or run in Catholic hospitals, kind of guidance for those kind of things, ethical committees and ethics groups and things like that for hospitals. So that's just there for completion. So this kind of shows you kind of where I went in terms of my resources and my understanding. You know, again, no one was really guiding me, which is totally fine because it led me to a lot of different places. And I love that. But there's all these different organizations that have individual resources, right? They have these meetings, or they have their books, or they have their online articles, or their ethicists. And they do all kind of pertain to specific audiences at times, but they really provide a lot of broad information that can go a lot of different ways. And then me understanding kind of how papal documents and how Vatican resources are spread out and given to local experts who then interpret them and teach them to us in the bioethics area too, not just in other Catholic things. So the USCCB ERDs can constantly reference different Vatican documents. And so that kind of helped me understand that, you know, we will always get information from the Vatican and get that primary influence and the word I'm looking for, guidance, and then local experts will interpret and teach them and apply them to our specific situations. And then I realized, because I'm someone who I guess doesn't like the gray, doesn't like all the different aspects that are kind of unsure, but I had to understand that every single healthcare specialty has their own unique ethical issues and dilemmas. Like I had said, that issue maybe with euthanasia from a physician perspective could look very different from a pharmacist perspective. So it's always going to be very complex and very unique. And I just had to embrace that and accept the fact that it is going to be difficult. Likely it's going to require an expert. And I knew, so yeah, the last point is that I'm going to continually have to learn, be challenged, and educate myself. And one other thing that really struck me is the fact that I'm going to need to learn how to explain this and explain my Catholic faith to others who aren't Catholic. And that's going to be an additional challenge. One of the beautiful things I learned was the fact that we have the natural moral law and we have the divinely revealed law. So while we can't, you know, impress our beliefs on others and make them believe what we believe, we absolutely can argue things from a human or a natural law perspective. And so I loved learning that. That was never something that was explained to me until I started doing this study and doing this work. So it'll continually be a process for me to play on that side of things and realize that I can argue these truths and argue these realities of our human nature and of life without having to make people believe what I believe as a Catholic. So to kind of end, some things I would think that I would want people to take away or kind of ponder after all of this information is I would just want people to think, you know, how can I use some resources to start answering some of the questions that I have in my own healthcare setting, in my own line of work, and who can I go to for guidance? I would say to go to experts, to go to people who are devoted to doing this kind of work. Personally, for me, it was a struggle because I thought I couldn't adequately answer these questions without getting a degree in bioethics or getting a theology degree of some sort. So I've had to go to experts and I've had to go to really good resources. Yet it's not something that I would tell anyone that they need to wait to try to answer these questions until they have that degree, because there are a lot of great resources. And so I would want people to start thinking about what resources can I use and who can I go to. And then hopefully you guys have encountered questions already and tried to think about pertinent ethical issues already out there, and then trying to, like I had said, get that grounding. What are some grounding moral principles? I didn't touch on any of them specifically, but some examples are, you know, principle of double effect, principle of totality, subsidiarity, all those kind of things. What can kind of be applied to these specific situations, I think is a good starting point. Just learning about the principles and then trying to see what can be applied to your situation. And then just how can you integrate your beliefs into your future role as a healthcare professional? Super broad, but this is just something else that I'm currently trying to think about, as I start my first real job as a pharmacist. How am I going to make sure that with contracts and with different things that I'm doing, that I am preserving what I want to do as a Catholic? As a mentor I currently have had said, she's like, you're going to have to look yourself in the mirror at night and face yourself and God whatever you do in your job. And it absolutely is true. It doesn't matter. I will have to explain to God what I've done in my job. So I'm still trying to understand that. And I think that everyone should take that into account and not just follow what everyone else is telling you. Try to think about how can I really make sure I'm being authentically Catholic in my profession. So thanks everyone for listening to all that information. So now we'll turn it over back to Rhea for the question and answer.
Thank you so much, Angela, for this wonderful, wonderful start to our series. Now I'm going to welcome any questions. You can drop them in the chat to everyone or specifically just to me. My name's Rhea Saltal. You will find me in there somewhere. But I think to get started, we do have one question to get us rolling. So what kind of helped you with that mind shift, as you stated, when reading the ERDs? What helped you understand that language, how to apply it? Some advice you can give to maybe incoming professionals or even people who haven't read it yet or kind of taken that avenue.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually remember moments of sitting down on a desk, trying to highlight and Googling every other word, it seemed like, just to understand one sentence. So I started putting it in my own words. I just kind of had to take a sentence and say, okay, well, how could I explain this to like a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old or whatever, So that was something that really helped. And we kind of do that in pharmacy even too, with complex medications and regimens. We try to dumb it down. So that was something that helped. Highlighting, I'm someone who likes to read when I exercise. So I would try to read them in those off times and whatever kind of works for you. Again, podcasts are really great when you're in the car. There are some NCBC podcasts that go over the ERDs. I think it's a 3-part series. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but don't be afraid to just Google every other word. As you read more of these documents, those words will be repeated, so it'll pay off in the end. But yeah, don't be afraid to study like you would in school. I really took it on as like a second kind of schoolwork, studying these documents.
Awesome. That's good. I think that's also very relatable just to training. When you're first learning your profession, it feels like it's another language. And so you just kind of keep mulling through it and it gets easier as you go. So another question we do have is, as someone who's been going through this process as a student, and you don't even have to be a student, you could be, a new trainee or someone who's been practicing for 5 years, whatever it is. How do you feel that experienced medical professionals who've learned this or are involved in these organizations can really help those who are just starting to learn or go through this process? Whether that's creating an environment, reaching out, mentorships, whatever you think, you going through it, how can they help?
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways. And honestly, I'm still really learning about all the resources out there. It could be just my own area that I grew up in and have lived in and gone to school in, that there's not this great, hub of resources. And there's probably some student medical group out there that's super involved and has a ton of resources and mentors that I just haven't found. So, but I was very disappointed. And it was a conversation between me and God frequently. Why is this so hard for me to find these answers? Shouldn't you make it easier? So I would love if people would try to make it easier. And actually one of my goals and passions is to lead a student medical group if I move somewhere and there's not one. I think that that's one of the easiest ways, finding people who are your same age struggling with these questions. And then, having senior, members guide them. In the St. Gianna group, every other month, I would say there would be like a physician who'd show up and kind of give some topic or just even talk about his or her life, how they're trying to integrate their faith into their medical profession. So the student groups are great. I personally would like to kind of educate partly in these groups that I hopefully would either join or start. Again, I think it's great if someone could just give that information and give those principles, kind of like in a class. I kind of wish there would be a class in this that I could attend, yet not to the length of a theology degree. So some blend of that. I'm still trying to figure out what that is, but A mentor also would have been great. Currently, the NCBC has helped me link up with a Catholic pharmacist in California who should be here for the third webinar. She should be joining with her husband. They're both pharmacists. So yeah, it's been great. We've had discussions about once a month about what I'm going through in the certification and questions I have. So student-run groups or student groups are great. Mentors are great. And then, yeah, of course, witnessing yourself in your profession is extremely inspiring. I mentioned my brothers. I have a couple of physician brothers, and while, yeah, again, they may not be interested in this like I am, they still witness to their faith, and they still, don't do practices because they know it's the truth, and they know that that's, again, what they'll have to answer to God one day. So that in itself, your own personal witness is very important.
Awesome. Awesome. So we do have another question. They're starting to come in. So we're gonna put you in the hot seat. So we do have a really good one. Can you speak broadly on the issue of transgenderism in Catholic healthcare? Does the church have a position on how pharmacists specifically can assist these folks with their struggles? Whether you've read about this or resources to reference to, whatever you've got.
I signed up for NCBC's email newsletters, and they actually recently published a book. And again, I love so many of their resources. So if I had a question, I probably would go to their website. Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of information on this topic. I think the most things that we've heard in terms of people who are transgender, we absolutely love the person, and we don't want them to suffer. We want to help them in any way, but that way is not leading them towards a path of untruth and promoting a certain lifestyle that would be to their detriment ultimately. So I think the question is how you care for the person and not cooperate in evil. And this question has come up in other areas where you just counsel people on certain things that are unethical. So I guess in the case of transgenderism, there are certain medications which aid in that process of gender reassignment, such as testosterone or estrogen and things like that. So, what level are you cooperating? How close are you to those evil acts? And yeah, what does that mean in terms of helping your patient? So I don't know a ton of concrete examples. The book I would reference, NCBC probably has a lot of great stuff. And I haven't encountered this issue on my own, but I was talking to my mentor, and yeah, she was just saying that you need to have those really honest conversations with patients, that you want to care for them as best as possible. And if you're not aiding in those evil acts, right, of like, really counseling them on how to use their medications that help with reassignment to the best of the ability, or things like that, you can still care for whatever other diseases they have, still be their healthcare provider. The kind of the things with me as that technician, not refusing to dispense Plan B. If that patient would have asked for anything else, such as refilling their prescription, counseling them on OTCs, I absolutely would have done that. And I think that will speak volumes when you're truly committed to patients, even if you don't agree with whatever acts that we think are wrong, you still care for them in a great way. I still think that they will respect that and respect you as a provider. So I wish I had a good resource. I wish I had a good example. I haven't encountered that on rotations, but it is, I think, yeah, more resources are coming out because it's becoming an ever increasing issue.
Awesome. And thank you so much for the question. Also, we will save these questions, and if we can find any additional resources or answers, those will always be sent out in the follow-up emails as well, and you're always welcome to reach out to us. So we do have another question. So the biggest challenge in modern society is that people want a binary look at things. The few that look for answers want quick, simple answers. I'm even guilty of this. And a small minority actually wants to dive deep into topics. How have engaged other students to gain some interest in these topics? How can we kind of get people to do a little bit more of that deep diving instead of that quick Google search?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm someone who's just naturally very curious. I'm a very curious person. So that just comes with my personality. I think a lot of people have started asking me questions because I've been very outright about things. For example, I would go to the abortion clinic here in Kansas and do silent protest and pray. And I think I've gotten questions after that's happened for people who have wanted to ask some questions to me. They knew I was Catholic, they knew about my faith. So personal witness, I just think is so big. And I think a lot of Catholic evangelization plays on that. Even though I could do a better job of just being out with it instead of just focusing on me being out with it and sharing that. So I'm still learning that because again, I have family and I wonder, how do I get them interested? I've just started talking around them about what I'm excited about, questions that come up, and I'll pose questions to them. We've had some great topics, great debates. So yeah, just start talking about what you're excited about, start witnessing, in really courageous kind of ways. It wasn't fun going to Planned Parenthood. It actually, it was very, it was very horrible seeing what was going on there and seeing the kind of protesting and seeing the women who would go in and out. So start being courageous though, and taking that time to make certain statements. And then, yeah, I hope that I can start a group where it's just very easy for people. They find community there. They find resources given, hopefully someone who's passionate to teach. It's always great to learn from someone who's excited. So those are kind of answers that I would have, but I agree it's challenging.
I think that's a great point. A lot of this is just talking, just creating an environment of open conversation and allowing people to express their opinions. And then, like you said, they'll hook on to something they're really interested in, and maybe that'll help them start that rabbit hole dive. So we do have time for one more question. So we do have one more. In the political climate, there is a growing push to prevent religious healthcare professionals from pushing their faith on their patients, quote unquote. Do you have any advice, or can you recommend any resources for Catholics who need to defend their right to stand by their faith as this right is beginning to be challenged?
Not super into politics, but I realized that, there's been a push to not allow religious freedom. I've listened to a couple, again, NCBC podcasts on this because I haven't really encountered that. I've been a student and I haven't had to defend that in my actual quote unquote job. Rotations kind of just give you responsibilities, and it's not too involved in what the pharmacist is actually doing independently. I guess if I were to say I would start by really focusing on what can I argue from a natural law perspective, even in myself, thinking about in the ambulatory care setting, if I have to kind of get involved with birth control, and realizing that this is just the fact that I don't think this is good for my patient. NCBC has talked a lot about how birth control is a lifestyle drug. There's nothing wrong with the health of the woman. We're not treating anything. We're aiding in a lifestyle for her to engage in that we wouldn't normally recommend anyway. It's high risk for STDs, high risk for other things. So I didn't talk about Jesus in one sentence there. I just focused on the health of the patient and actually what was being done. It is going to be hard I'm still trying to practice just focusing on that in conversations with people. And then, in terms of the political kind of sphere and how to make that present, advocacy groups. I know the NCBC does a lot of lobbying and is involved with a lot of people. Again, I don't work for the NCBC, but donating to them, donating to their advocacy groups, things like that, I would think would probably be my next step. But it's going to be tough. Maybe in a couple of years I'll have a better answer for that, but still got to work on it.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for answering all of these questions. I think a common theme is everyone needs to go check out the NCBC website and even sign up maybe for their course. So we'll go ahead and wrap up the meeting a little early. I want to thank everybody for being here, Angela for speaking. I would love to thank our wonderful team for helping us put this very first webinar on. Remember, it is the first of three parts. So the second part will take place on April 27th. So a beautiful, perfect 2 weeks from now. It will be on human dignity and married love. That one will set the stage for the final and third part of the series covering emergency contraceptives. I highly, highly recommend you attend these next 2 webinars. This one helps us get to know Angela and those resources that she's used and the work she's done to really talk about these great topics in the next 2. You will receive a follow-up email with all of those dates, registration links. We will even provide the PowerPoint used today, so you can save it, send it to people, and I will be working on trying to also provide the recording to this webinar so you can share it to anyone who you feel might also benefit from it, and our Q&A session. So our wonderful team is Jess and Alonzo, also Taylor, who's probably running to silence our 2-year-old. We're all working and have families, and I'm glad we could all be together tonight.